As an anime YouTuber, you often end up talking about the big shows that everyone is into at the moment, and that's fine, I have no problem with that, I love big shows. But there's something to be said about diving into the smaller series that are out there, being made by independent creators and hosted on websites that take stories like these. That is why I'm always very happy to check out smaller creators, and that's also why I was so interested when my patron Kendre Williams requested this certain video. In this video, I would like to quickly review a webtoon called Rise of the Elites, which is hosted over on webtoon.com, which is also where I read it, and where you could read it if you find this video interesting. So stick around, let's talk about Rise of the Elites. It is often said that many stories should start with an inciting incident, a central event that starts and catalyzes the plot. Rise of the Elites takes this very seriously and immediately starts with a terrorist attack at a mall, which, as a first setting, is already quite striking. Moreover, it's not just a regular terrorist attack, but rather it's a terrorist attack involving bloodthirsty zombies called the Elites, which quickly overrun a local mall and cause massive bloodshed and terror. Within this terror is trapped one of our main protagonists, Norman and his friend Isame, who together with their class were on a trip to this mall with all their fancy shops and things that they wanted to look at. This event eventually turns into one big long fight that denotes the first roughly 10 chapters of the series. Generally, the plot follows humanity's fight against these elites, against their mysterious origin and against the people that will wield them against humanity for some unknown reason. Additionally, Norman and other characters in the story exhibit superhuman powers that seem to be linked to these elites. However, I will not take anything away from this. You will just have to read this by yourself. I don't want to go too much further because pretty much past this point, the story starts evolving and this is what I would start considering spoilers. So in case you want to check it out, I'm going to focus on the starting portion and how it characterizes the rest of the story. For one, I think there is really something to be said about a story that is this bold right from the start, trying to eventually create a sort of world building through action. We don't get a lot of direct exposition from the start about this universe and this kingdom, but rather we get it through the things that happen. We don't get a dump on the elites, the zombie-like creatures right at the start, we get it as they come up, which is a pretty decent way of doing world building if you want to avoid front-loading. And if you're gonna start in medias res, like this series does, in medias res meaning in the middle of the action, then that is a perfectly fine approach. And it is this approach that remains throughout the story, with information mostly being presented through action rather than through exposition dumps, even though those also exist. Another thing that Rise of the Elites does pretty interestingly is how it characterizes its characters, where a lot of them have lengthy discussions with each other that tickle out each other's character traits. This is nothing spectacular, but it is interesting to see this done so consistently in what is essentially an independent manga. Speaking of the independency aspect of it, it is important to understand when you're talking about independent manga, there are different standards and different things to expect about it. And one of the ones that I'm always the most curious about is the art style. Because of course, when you are working with your own personal artist or are the person drawing it yourself, that's a very different situation to, for example, Weekly Shonen Jump. So I'm always interested to see how people get around that problem. And I think Rise of the Elites does a really great job of finding their own artistic voice. It is still very clearly a web-based comic. It has that sort of thick line shading and screen tones that is synonymous with that style, but it manages to remain consistent within itself to the point where if I would see a picture now in that style, I could tell that it's the art style from Rise of the Elites, which is a great victory for the art. I think that is one of the big important things you need to nail. Can people understand that your art is yours and no one else's? Does your art scream your series' title whenever you see it? And in the case of Rise of the Elite, I wouldn't say it screams that it's from that manga, but it definitely tells me that. Additionally, while Webtoons is obviously read vertically, meaning that traditional paneling, like, again, in Weekly Shonen Jump, does not quite apply there. There is still some interesting paneling going on. Some of the action panels have really nice sequentiality between them, which, again, is something that takes a lot of practice, so I am surprised to see this in a manga like this. I would say that for the visual part of it, I was mostly satisfied. However, as with everything, when you're starting out or when you're doing something independently, there will always be things that can improve. And in the case of Rise of the Elites, that would be twofold. One, and this is an important one, and if the duo who's making this series are listening to this video right now, I want you to take this to heart. They need to fix the English. The English text in Rise of the Elites is littered with spelling and grammar mistakes, and that is, I want to say, unacceptable. And here's why. Manga, as a written and drawn medium, has to rely on art and text to get its message across. Art can take many forms and look many different ways, and that's fine, that's called a style. But when you talk about language and about the text itself, that needs to be clear and correct, because otherwise we have no way of understanding what you're telling us. It's not quite that bad, you can always understand what the authors mean, but there's a lot of mistakes from top to bottom, and it did definitely hinder my personal enjoyment, though I am an English student, so you kind of got unlucky there. The other problem that I found is that some of the images on Webtoons are weirdly squished, almost like they were uploaded in the wrong aspect ratio, which in certain cases made it really hard to even read what was going on because the text was of course also squished. So that's definitely something I would ask you to look at if you want to improve for the future, or even going back to the older chapters. Because again, these are small annoyances that can build up if they happen often enough, and unfortunately, they do happen quite often. Alright, so, in conclusion, would I recommend Rise of the Elites? If you're already familiar with Webtoons and with these smaller independent creators, I'd say go for it. If not, this might be a bit too far removed from what you may be used to, so maybe hold off on that. Because basically, this is a fun and interesting story that certainly had my attention for it, but it has a lot of little formal and even structural issues that do hold it back for me personally. It doesn't help that a lot of the characters' dialogue, when it is in correct English, is still relatively generic. And that's probably one of the bigger problems I had personally with it, with my investment. As an adult, I have a hard time investing into characters that talk like this. However, again, if you are open to these suggestions, if you're open to see a story grow, and if you're open to watching it grow alongside the creators who are active on Patreon and YouTube and Twitter and whatnot, then this is perfect for you. I think it is great that we live in an age where everyone can share their stories and grow alongside their community. And already the fact that we have here a duo, an author and a artist, just makes it seem like they're very serious about this, which I like. I like seeing that people are serious about creative writing, and I will personally be following this just to see where this goes. If I had to rate it based on what I read, I would give it perhaps a 6 or a 7 out of 10, because again, it is an independent manga, so the rules are a bit different. But yeah, I had fun with it, I spent some time with it, and I might do it again. But that's it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time. And of course, a very special thank you to our patrons, including Christian Finkbeiner, Erina, Kendre Williams, Sini, Zanji1, and Mr. Meander.